Welcome back to Multiversal Studios. I will be looking at examining the entirety of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Capsule Monster arc, and for those who haven't watched this arc, it's a 12 episode long masterpiece, which takes place between the Grand Championship arc and the final arc, The Dawn of the Duel. Now, Capsule Monsters isn't a new concept, as it was already portrayed in the manga, as well as Season 0 plenty of times. I think the Capsule Monster arc is just a revamp, as they actually made the capsules look like time capsules instead of eggs, and they also changed the rules of the game. The series starts with Yugi having nightmares. In his nightmares, it is Atem facing down a creature cast in shadows, which is the 7-armed fiend. As we don't see its full body or its face, the assumption is that it's a big bad guy for the arc. Now, Yugi in the dream also notices that Atem is wearing a strange armor that becomes relevant later on in the series. Now, the odd part of this dream is that it's clearly referencing a future event that is about to occur. However, Yugi is still able to interact with Atem and the great monster, which is rarely the case when it comes to visions of the future. Before the dream ends, the 7-armed fiend references that any questions Yugi has will be answered in a game, which is quite obviously referencing the title of the arc, Capsule Monsters. Now, that's all we get to see. However, Yugi mentions that these are recurring dreams, and when Yugi wakes up, we see the Millennium Puzzle glowing, almost like it's reacting to the dream. So is this potentially a new power the Millennium Puzzle has that we don't know about? But right off the bat, the episode starts in a great way. It leaves us with questions that need to be answered, as well as the introduction of an entirely new villain and what appears to be a new game. Now, later on, Yugi discovers that Grandpa's game shop is closed and that Grandpa still hasn't returned from the secret expedition that he had gone on.
Where are you off to?
Oh, right. I'm going on a secret expedition.
You never told me anything about that.
That's what makes it a secret.
Now, bearing in mind Grandpa is in his late 70s, going on secret expeditions that he's unable to tell his grandson about definitely seems suspicious, but considering Grandpa's past and everything he had achieved, for example breaking into tombs and taking treasures like the Millennium Puzzle for example, and actually keeping it for himself, I think the only secret is that he's up to something illegal. Now, we move on to our secondary plot concerning Joey, where he wins a raffle for a trip for 4 people, an all-inclusive trip to India. 4 people, so that covers Yugi, Joey, Tristan and Taya, but what about poor Duke Devlin? Now we finally see the introduction of the game that was introduced in the dream at the start of the episode, or a glimpse anyway. It's a board game known as Capsule Monsters, where Taya is obsessing over the happy lover, which is definitely not going to be relevant later on in the episode. It seems like a pretty straightforward game, where monsters which appear from capsules battle each other with the goal of capturing your opponent's symbol. Now it seems like a fun game, so why was it never made mainstream to the general public? Well, it turns out Yu-Gi-Oh! Capsule Monsters Colosseum was an old PlayStation 2 game, which similar to Dungeons Dice Monsters would just never caught on. Something the game does that the anime does a terrible job at is explaining the rules. It seems that when monsters battle each other, attributes play a great part in it. As you can see from this image, water is strong against fire, fire is strong against wood, wood is strong against wind, and wind is strong against water. And then we have earth, which is strong against thunder, thunder which is strong against light, and light which is strong against dark, and finally dark is strong against earth. Now we can only assume that the rest of the matchups just have a neutral level of damage. Now this kinda reminds me of Pokemon, however just a little more confusing. Now we'll hold on to this information and see if it actually plays a part in the anime, or is it going to be completely dismissed. Now we see Yugi explaining the rules to Taya at school, however I genuinely feel like Taya has no interest in these games and just plays them to not let Yugi down.
You feel like taking my place before I get my butt kicked?
What she actually wants to say is, Tristan, help me, I don't want to play this game anymore. Now Joey lets his friends know the good news and they head off on their 6-day trip to India on a private plane. Now I have to say, winning all of this in a raffle in the middle of the street is pretty amazing, and the fact that no one thought it was a bit weird was even more amazing. Was a 6-day trip to India on a private plane and normal price for a raffle back then? Now, as they were on the flight to India, it occurred to me that Grandpa hadn't come back home, and for whatever reason, Yugi decided that now was a good time to go on a 6-day holiday without checking on his grandpa. Now I get Grandpa is an adult, but if my 72-year-old grandpa went on a secret expedition and didn't come back on the day he said he was going to, I would be worried, and I probably wouldn't disappear to India for 6 days, but maybe that's just me. But Yugi doesn't have time to worry about Grandpa, as he just discovers as they get closer to their destination, the engines of the plane go down and they have to crash land, and they all make it out unharmed, and the pilot radios for help. The fact that they are all unharmed is genuinely a miracle, because just look at the state of that plane. Like Jesus, I would be traumatized for life. This plane looks like it went headfirst into a mountain, but that doesn't deter Joey and Tristan from exploring.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm not wasting my free trip waiting for a rescue team.
I'm with you, dude, so let's check this place out.
Sometimes I feel like Joey and Tristan are robots. They literally crash landed in the middle of nowhere in a plane crash, and they're more worried about not making the most of their vacation and decided to go explore. Like, am I just going insane? However, it gets shrugged off with a classic line from Taya.
Oh, right. As if being totally clueless has ever stopped those two knuckleheads before.
Now guys, this is why I love Taya, the only person with a flipping brain.
So am I the only one who thinks walking aimlessly through an unknown jungle that's probably filled with wild man-eating animals is a bad idea?
Now they eventually run into a key person in the story, whose name is Dr. Alex Brisbane. Now this is where things get crazy. It turns out Alex actually knows Grandpa Moto, and it was Alex who Grandpa had gone on a secret expedition with, and he reveals to Yugi that his grandpa had gone missing.
Oh no! Grandpa's missing! We have to find him!
Now where was this reaction when Grandpa literally didn't come home from his expedition? Now at this point in the episode, we realize we're overwhelmed with coincidences and mystery. And we also realize that Grandpa kept it so secret that he didn't even tell Yugi what region of the world they were going to. So at this point in the story, Joey won a raffle to India, which is in the same direction as Grandpa's expedition. The plane crashed at the exact location as his grandpa, so clearly this had been organized. And the final mystery is how no one in Yugi's friendship group realized this apart from Atem.
We just happened to win a trip. Our plane happens to crash. Then, we happen to meet the last man to see your grandfather before he disappeared. If you ask me, Yugi, it's all too convenient.
Which is why I love Atem and Taya, the only two people with flipping brains. Now the mysterious Dr. Alex takes them to the site of the expedition, which was a pyramid. Now this pyramid was called the legendary pyramid of Alexander. Wait a minute. His name is Alex, and the pyramid is named Alexander after the great Alexander the Great in history. I don't know about you guys, but something tells me that he might be Alexander the Great.
This masterful warrior and brilliant strategist conquered nation after nation.
I won't lie guys, this guy is literally talking about himself. Masterful warrior and brilliant strategist. Let's not forget that he's super humble as well. Now Dr. Alex leads them into the pyramid to show them exactly where Yugi's grandpa had been seen last. Now the pyramid is full of traps. However, Dr. Alex expertly guides them through, and the genius which is Taya notices that he knows the exact placement of the traps too well for someone who had only been in there once. So if it wasn't already clear, Dr. Alex isn't so great after all, and seems to be leading Yugi into a trap, and Alex is probably the reason that Grandpa disappeared in the first place. Now they are led to a giant room with tiles which kind of look like a map or a giant board game, which looks very similar to the Capsule Monsters board game they were playing at the start of the episode. So this was clearly a giant Capsule Monsters board game, and as usual, Joey brainlessly runs in and gets teleported into the game, while the rest of the crew follow. Now once in the game, they are given tool belts, which are there to hold the capsules, as well as a dual disc looking device, which kind of looks like a weapon. And I have to say, for the design, they really outdid themselves, because it looks amazing. Now I have to say, I'm a huge fan of this kind of anime trope, where the protagonists find themselves in a different world, with different rulings. Something about it feels so exciting to watch. Now once Yugi and his friends enter the world, they are immediately chased by Gokibori and the basic insect monsters, and Yugi says that he recognizes them from the Capsule Monsters board game.
I recognize those things! They're from the Capsule Monsters board game!
But I'm pretty sure they're just regular Duel Monster cards as well. So Joey is all alone in the world of Capsule Monsters, and Yugi gets separated from Tristan and Taya. Now when confronted by the basic insect, Yugi accidentally touches one of the capsules, unlocking the Celtic Guardian. Taya and Tristan also do the same. Taya receives the Happy Lover and Tristan receives Thunder Kid. Now at the start of the episode, Yugi and Taya were literally using Celtic Guardian and Happy Lover whilst playing the board game. Now the positives positives and negatives so far in the episode. I love when Yugioh does this. It feels like they really open up the world of Yugioh when they bring our protagonists halfway across the world and they're experiencing something new, which makes it just more fun to watch, especially since the rules weren't explained very well at all. It looks like we're going to discover the rules of capsule monsters whilst Yugi and his friends are experiencing them in real time. All we know is that Yugi said in order to win this game and rescue Grandpa, they had to capture the symbol game piece. Now the negative is, I feel like due to seeing the first opening pieces, which is the Celtic Guardian and Happy Lover, that we're going to see a theme of monsters which are already stereotypically cards that belong to Yugi and are played in his regular Yu-Gi-Oh deck. For example, the Dark Magician or Kuribo. Now I think it would be much more interesting if they mix things up a bit and make it more random, like it would actually be in the game. Like what if instead of Celtic Guardian it was Dark Blade or a Jerry Beansman? Wouldn't that be so much more interesting to watch than just the usual fan service and Yugi getting all of his ace monsters? Now Yugi and his friends are stuck in different parts of the Capsule Monsters board. Joey is in the mountains being attacked by Kurama, a flying bird monster. Yugi is still in the forest being attacked by Trent, which is a living tree. And Taya and Tristan are on the beach being attacked by a sea serpent known as Rootwater. As they are now all individual story plots, we'll treat them as such. Starting with Joey. Joey was used by Kurama as bird feed for the little baby Kuramas. However, Joey soon finds his own way to escape and finds a capsule, which surprise surprise is a baby dragon, which is one of Joey's original monsters he used in Duelist Kingdom. Now whilst escaping on the back of baby dragon, Joey comes across a treasure chest, which is a giant video game trope. And inside the chest he finds a map of the world. Now Yugi on the other hand was attacked by a tree. Now what I always find odd about this scene is that when they first landed in the middle of the forest, they were surrounded by lots of capsules. However, once our protagonists actually start to figure out how the world works, they suddenly start to disappear, which is very convenient. Now Atem, who's proving to be really good at games, discovers that the duelist looking cannon strapped to their arms is actually to summon the capsule monsters. So we see the first proper battle between the two capsule monsters. Using our chart, we can see that Celtic Guardian is earth and the tree creature is actually wood. Now technically they should have no advantage against each other. However, if it was Duel Monsters logic, Celtic Guardian should dominate as it has more attack points.
What's the deal? In Duel Monsters, Celtic Guardian has way more attack points than that tree monster.
I know. Yet for some reason our monster's attacks seem to have no effect at all.
However, they added a new element into the game, which is kind of nostalgic to Duelist Kingdom, which is a field power bonus. So since they were in a forest, the tree gained more attack, making it equal to Celtic Guardian. Now something that Atem deciphers, which I think is really important, is that the board game they play at school is actually based on the world they're living in at the moment. So now the question is, who made that game? Since it must have been someone who had traveled and somehow escaped this game they're in now in order to make the board game. So that's a mystery we need to hang on to and see if it gets answered later on. Now as Atem is fighting Trent, it actually starts recruiting more trees and Yugi says that it must have been their special ability. Now in the Duel Monsters card game, Trent is a normal monster and doesn't have a special ability, but I think in this world any monster can have a special ability. Now another important detail we discover in the fight between Celtic Guardian and Trent is that whenever Celtic Guardian received damage, so did Atem, which is very similar to the rules of Marek's Shadow game in Battle City, which just adds to the theory that this entire world is filled with dark shadow powers. However, luckily Atem discovers another capsule monster before he gets overwhelmed by the trees. Now this is where it gets really interesting, as I was expecting a monster like Curse of Dragon, since in Duelist Kingdom he uses a spell Burning Land with Curse of Dragon in order to remove the forest land. So I thought he would do a similar thing here, using the fire breath of Curse of Dragon in order to deal with the trees. However, to my delight, it was something completely new. It was called Hinotama Soul, which, tell me if I'm wrong, I believe Yugi doesn't actually own in Duel Monsters. Now this is really exciting, since this opens up the possibility that Yugi might get other monsters that he doesn't actually own as well. And since now that we don't know what other monsters Yugi will get in the future, it breaks the mold of predictability. Now since Hinotama Soul is fire and Trent is wood, it is obviously weak to this one. So it seems regardless of the environmental boosts, I think the weakness chart takes priority. Now Tristan and Taya on the other hand are battling a giant root water, which is a giant sea serpent, with two very weak monsters. Now you would assume since Tristan has a Thunder Kid, he should have an advantage against water creatures. However, that's not the case, and we only think that because we've been indoctrinated by Pokemon rulings. In this game, Thunder is actually stronger against light for some reason. So in theory, water and thunder are actually neutral elements, but the sea monster is actually in the ocean, so surely it would get an advantage boost. And Thunder Kid's lightning attack gets blocked really easily by the creature. Now unfortunately, Tristan and Thunder Kid are hurt in the battle. Now this is the part that I think is really cringe in my opinion, as we discover that Happy Lover is super weak, however has an ability to heal, which I'm just fed up of. I feel like every female character is given healing abilities. For example, Sakura from Naruto, or Orihime from Bleach, Katara from Avatar Legend of Aang. I hope we get to see more of Taya instead of constant background support. However, thanks to Taya healing Tristan and Thunder Kid, they managed to defeat Root Water with a powerful lightning attack which catches the monster off guard. However, it isn't the end, since the Root Water monster seems to be just an outer shell, and soon as it was defeated, it showed its true form, which is the High Tide Gyojin, which in Duel Monster terms is much stronger by an attack of 750, which is a decent buff in power. So it isn't looking good for Taya and Tristan, since they barely managed to defeat Root Water. However, they are saved.
Alright, Summon Skull! Lightning Strike!
So that was clearly Grandpa's voice, using Summon Skull's most powerful attack in order to defeat the creature in one blow. Now we learnt a lot in this episode, and it gives us a good idea about the rules and consequences of the game. Now I did feel like they introduced Grandpa back into the story a little soon, as they had just entered the game, and I felt like Grandpa should have progressed a little further since he's been in the game a lot longer. However, his entrance was definitely pretty cool. Also, something I noticed which I should have mentioned earlier, but does Grandpa seem much younger in this arc than he does in any other arcs? Like, I feel like he seems much older in the first season of Yu-Gi-Oh than he does in this arc, which like makes no sense. So far in the story, I really like the direction of where this is headed. Each of the typical side characters like Tristan and Taya are both receiving a share of the limelight, which is actually one of my favourite things from the Virtual World arc, where again the side characters played a crucial role and didn't just rely on cheerleading. Now it's not only Tristan and Taya, but now we are also seeing Grandpa Moto in action, which is a completely different dynamic to what we're used to, since up until now we've only heard stories or flashbacks of his adventures, so it's really nice to see him being an addition to the group. Now, due to the Summon Skull lightning attack on the sea monster, this actually ended up reuniting Tristan and Taya and Grandpa and Yugi, as the giant lightning strike could be seen for miles. Joey also rejoins the party later on as he finds him on the back of Baby Dragon. Now, during the nighttime as they are discussing their plan on how to escape the game, Solomon Moto is unusually quiet, which I wasn't a fan of. I was hoping he would take charge, as he had technically had the most experience with dealing with ancient games. Also, I really wanted him to share what he had learnt whilst he was there, as he was there for so long before Yugi had entered. Now they decide to head to the house, which was displayed in the map that Joey had found. However, that's the exact moment they realise that they were surrounded by a pack of flower wolves, which is actually a fusion monster made up of Silverfang and Dark World thorns. Now, due to the sheer number of wolves, the party was overwhelmed. Now, what really annoyed me was Yugi now had two capsule monsters, the Hinatama Soul and the Celtic Guardian. Now, I'm not too sure how many capsule monsters you can summon at the same time, but I genuinely feel like he relies on Celtic Guardian way too much. In the ongoing battle, they on multiple occasions pick up a piece of wood with fire on it and try to ward off the monsters, when Atem literally has a living fire monster which could pretty easily take care of those monsters. I can only assume, due to them being in the forest and having flowers on them, that they're a wood type. which are naturally weak to fire types. Now in this combat, we also discover that Grandpa's summoned skull had turned a silver color, which means it takes a longer time to recharge, as summoned skull is a level 6 monster. Grandpa also seemed not to have any other monsters in his tool belt, which means the first capsule he ever touched was the summoned skull. Talk about new player luck. Now when Yugi realizes that they can't beat the army of wolves, they toss Celtic Guardian's sword in the air, and Thunder Kid hits it with lightning, which creates like a solar flare type attack, which blinds the wolves long enough so they can escape. Now, unknown to them, whilst making their escape, the entire forest seemed to be moving, as all this time they were on the back of a giant island turtle, which I won't lie is pretty cool. Honestly, I really like that twist, because based on the cards we're seeing so far, we're getting a nice spread of Yu-Gi-Oh cards, which really does make this a lot of fun to watch.
Relax, guys! Island turtles are usually pretty peaceful creatures who won't attack unless they're provoked.
I believe the island turtle is a feature in any video game which is there to push the protagonist onwards towards the main part of the storyline, as the island turtle seems to sink, leaving them stranded right next to a temple, which seems like their next destination in order to progress in the game. Now once inside the temple, they are trapped with a Lajin, the genie of the lamp. Now none of their monsters were strong enough to take on the Lajin, apart from Grandpa's summoned skull, but obviously plot will demand that Grandpa's summoned skull is still resting. I bet you anything, as soon as all the hardship is over, I bet the summoned skull will be ready for action. Now being the hero a Temp always has to be, he asks his friends to leave Lajin to him, since when their monsters take damage, so does a human controlling it, and he wants to, you know, protect them. Classic Yugi.
Leave him to me!
Yugi, are you out of your mind?
Now in episode 1, Yugi does something similar and tries to stop his friends from coming into the game with him, as he's already put his friends through a lot already. However, when Atem does it, it's just way more cringe for some reason. Now it wasn't just Lajin, because a new enemy approaches, which is the Neo Aquamador. And guess what Yugi does?
Please go! Leave these two to me!
No way!
I refuse to allow anyone else to get hurt!
Why don't you stop trying to be a hero and let us help you out, Yugi?
Honestly, I'm glad Joey said something, because at what point will Atem let his friends help? It's just getting ridiculous, especially when he's just got a Celtic Guardian and another capsule monster which he refuses to use. Now what really annoys me in this scene is that I was getting really excited about the side characters playing a part in the story. However, against the Flower Wolves, Grandpa's summoned skull was out of action and he was nearly torn apart by the wolves, and Taya was just no help. Like, I know she doesn't have an offensive monster, but she didn't even try to support anyone with her happy lover monster. And in this combat against Aquamador, Taya and Grandpa are both frozen. Why are they doing them so dirty? Now eventually they discover that the Lajin and the Aquamador were too powerful. Now since this is a game, brute strength isn't always the answer. Now it turns out, according to Yugi, Aquamador and Lajin are each other's weaknesses.
Each of these monsters' strength is the other one's weakness.
But are they? According to the chart, water is strong against fire, so even though it's ice, I guess that still counts? And now fire is meant to be strong against ice, but on the chart it shows that it's strong against wood. So should there be another attribute which is ice? Since fire being strong against ice is normally a Pokemon ruling. So at this point, I'm not too sure. This situation doesn't seem to match any of the game rulings. The only logical argument I can think of is that Aquamador is a water monster, so water is strong against Lajin, and Lajin has 1800 attack in Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, and Aquamador only has 1200 attack. So even though fire isn't strong against water, but maybe in sheer brute strength, Lajin overpowers the Aquamador, which is how they destroy each other. I feel like if they really wanted this to work, they could have chosen a million other monsters, which was a better pick than Neo Aquamador. Now once Lajin and Aquamador take each other out, they have technically won the challenge in the temple, which revealed an ancient Egyptian text, which Grandpa translated. Before the shadows have blackened the land, go to the Fortress of Fear, locate the place where the spirits sleep, and the pathways will become clear. Now what they realize is the shadows is actually referring to sunset. So before sunset occurs, they must go to the Fortress of Fear. Now if you look at the map, there are only two buildings. One of them is the temple, where they are right now, and the other is just a house, which we can assume is the Fortress of Fear. Fear. Now, as soon as they completed this challenge, I believe the timer starts, because we already saw them spend a night in this world, and I don't think they have unlimited chances, so they have until sunset to make it from the temple to the Fortress of Fear. Now, because this series is only 12 episodes long, I feel like a lot is being crammed into a few episodes. The positives being, each episode is guaranteed to be jam-packed with adventure and excitement, and the negative being, they seem a little rushed on occasion. So since Yugi and his friends were trapped in the temple, surrounded by water, they had to make it to the Fortress of Fear before sundown. Now, they needed another way to get across the water. Now, whenever they face hardship, they have to remind themselves that this is just a game, and we've all been there when we're playing a game, and you feel like, what are you meant to do next? Well, there's always a way, and Tristan proves that by finding an underground path which leads underneath the lake and onto dry land. The only issue being, it leads them directly to a spooky graveyard. And what do we expect to find in a graveyard? Well, skeletons and ghosts. And that's exactly what they find. They come across an army of skull servants and wood remains. Now, my only complaint is that the fight scenes have been super predictable and boring. It seems like they get attacked by a horde of a very similar type of Yugioh monster, and at the start, Yugi and his friends are able to defeat them. However, they eventually get overwhelmed, and this seems like a pattern which happens again and again. And in this situation, Celtic Guardian, Thunder Kid and Baby Dragon do their best to fend off against the horde. Now, as usual, Grandpa is unable to summon his summoned skull and help in the fight, and Taya, whilst everyone else's monsters are destroying those creatures, her happy lover is shown to be running away. Honestly, it's so sad to watch. Now, the writers here have two options. Now, in a pinch, they can find a way to escape the situation, like they did with the Flower Wolves, or provide more capsule monsters, like they did against Trent when Yugi was struggling. And in this circumstance, it's the capsule monster option. So Yugi, Joey, and Taya each receive a new capsule monster. Joey received the Flame Swordsman, which, like the Baby Dragon, is an iconic monster in Joey's deck. Yugi received Kuribo, which again is another iconic monster. And finally, Taya receives a monster that is actually decent, which is the Dark Witch. Honestly, I'm so happy she received this. The Dark Witch is legit a strong and reliable monster, which puts Taya back in the game. Now, each member of the party had a decent monster they could use. Now, the monsters that came out of the capsules, apart from Kuribo, had a lot of AoE damage and was easily able to handle the swarms of the undead. And can we just circle back to how happy we are about Taya receiving the Dark Witch? Now, once the monsters are defeated, they continue to run towards the Fortress of Fear. I mean, let's not forget, they're still under immense time pressure and need to reach there before the sun goes down. Now, as they accomplish the cardio challenge, which is to run up several feet of stairs, they finally come across the house, which actually is a temple. However, as they approach, 4 walls rise up, blocking them from entry, which seems like another game for the crew to figure out. They try many things, for example, brute strength. But then Joey had a great idea, which was to fly over the walls with his baby dragon. Now, honestly, I think this was a great idea, because I think this was thinking outside the box. But similar to any normal game, if they don't want you to go a certain way, they'll just put a force field in its way. Now, when they were out of options, Grandpa finally is able to summon the summoned skull. And what does he do with it? He attacks a wall. That's right, after being useless for the last 10 episodes, he brings out the summoned skull to attack a wall, and it does no damage. Once again, Grandpa, I'm disappointed in you. I just expected a lot more from his character. He has so much experience in games, because we know he used to be a game master, and this is obviously a puzzle type game. So Grandpa resorting to brute strength, I just feel like he's so out of character.
But how? Summoned skull can blast through anything.
Now, each corner of the walls had a monster positioned in a different pose, and they soon discovered that each of them held that pose, that the walls would open. So basically, if you think about it, you need a total of 5 members of your party to pass this stage. 4 of you to pose like the statues, and 1 of you to actually go through the walls. So if you stumble into this world by yourself, or with a friend, you're pretty much screwed, which is just a major flaw. So if you don't have another 4 people in your party, you would spend the rest of your life in this game, or you would have to wait for 4 other people to enter. Now the question is, do you age in this game, or do you live forever? Now once the walls had come down, it was truly a race against time. Inside the room was like a tomb. So if you guys remember the second part of the prophecy, it said, locate the place where the spirit sleeps, and the pathway will become clear. So the tomb would be where the spirit sleeps, and once that's done, the pathway will become clear. However, unknowingly to Yugi, he runs into a trap, as one of the tiles was fake and he fell into a secret room where the walls came closing in, almost like a scene from Indiana Jones. Now what I really like about this scene is when Yugi was falling into the trap, he automatically switches to the Pharaoh. I mean, this was just a roll and a good landing, but it was enough for the Pharaoh to take over, which probably means that the Pharaoh is just in better physical shape than Yugi. Now as they tried to find a means to escape, Kuriboh called out to the Pharaoh from inside the capsule. Now I can't understand why this is the case, so it must be a special ability that Kuriboh has, which allows him to communicate to Atem from inside the capsule. Now once Kuriboh is summoned, all it does is move back and forth from wall to wall. Now for me personally, I thought this meant Atem should jump from wall to wall as it's closing in order to climb and reach the exit. And whilst Kuriboh was moving frantically from wall to wall, Yugi notices a capsule which was just out of reach. However, Atem makes the biggest leap I've ever seen and nearly makes it. So I was kind of wondering why Kuriboh was even summoned, because he didn't play a big part. However, Kuriboh managed to give Atem the final push he needed in order to reach the capsule. And what was the monster inside the capsule? Well, I'm pretty sure you can figure it out. It was Yugi's boss monster, the Dark Magician. So far, Yugi has the Celtic Guardian, Hinatama Soul, Kuriboh, and the Dark Magician. Now whilst Yugi was doing this, Joey failed to keep his position, as his was the most tricky, with 1 foot off the ground. However, I always thought this was weird, as this position should have gone to Taya, as she is a dancer and probably has the most experience keeping her balance. And when Joey inevitably fails to keep his balance, the walls went up again and the statues came to life and started to attack them. However, with Yugi's new Dark Magician, he used a spell called Magical Crossroads. Now this is a completely new spell which protected each capsule monster that Taya, Joey, Tristan and Grandpa had, and then proceeded to eliminate the 4 statues at the same time. Probably one of the most broken abilities I've ever seen. Like, where did that come from? Now the one attacking Grandpa was still advancing, so Grandpa thought it was a good idea to attack it with lightning. However, at the same time, the monster had grabbed Summon's skull, so the lightning hit the monster as well as Summon's skull, which resulted in the statue and Summon's skull being obliterated, dealing lots of damage to Grandpa. Now once the Summoned Skull was obliterated, I'm not too sure if the capsule was obliterated as well, but we'll definitely have to keep an eye on that, because I'm wondering, if a monster is defeated, do you also lose the capsule? Also, can I just say, I'm not trying to be a hater on Grandpa, but he's literally done nothing so far. Honestly, if the Summoned Skull was still resting, it probably would have been better for him. Now the crazy part is, when the statues have been defeated, Yugi now has one last chance to get to the tomb and open it before the sun goes down. However, he does the same thing he did last time, which is just running in and heading straight to the tomb. Now may I remind you, the last time he did this, he fell into a trap, so surely some caution would have been better here. But luckily this time around, nothing happened and he made it to the tomb and even opened it in time. Now once the sun had gone down, they received a prize, which was the armor set, which looked exactly like the armor Atem was wearing in the dream in episode 1. Now with the armor came an ancient Egyptian text, which Grandpa translated. Actually, you know what? Grandpa actually is useful when it comes to translation, so credit where credit's due. Also, that reminded me, so now not only do you need 5 members of the party to even pass this initial challenge, but you also need someone in the party who can read Egyptian hieroglyphics. Honestly, it's a tough criteria. Now the text read, "Pass through this doorway and thy journey will start. 5 trials will follow to test thy heart. But I warn you, this journey is not for the weak." only a true warrior can unearth what you seek. So basically, everything they had done up until this moment was the initial trial, and the proper test actually begins now. The armor attached to Yugi, signifying that he is the true warrior. But honestly, I kinda wanted the armor to jump onto Tristan, just to see how shocked everyone would be. Now, without any real choice, they head into the portal and enter Trial 1. Now, I have to be honest with you guys, I enjoy capsule monsters, and I want to share that enjoyment with you guys, which is why I started this series in the first place. However, there is a few episodes I do dislike, and unfortunately, episode 5 is one of them. And I will still try to be fair and give it the breakdown as usual, but I did find this episode a little boring, even though it did have moments of coolness. For example, Yugi finally getting to use the armor. Now, as they enter into the portal, they come across a desert for their first trial, and Grandpa collapses as he sustained a lot of damage from their previous battle. However, even after Tear tries to heal Grandpa with Happy Lover, Grandpa wasn't fully healed, which is to be expected since he's really old. Now, they try and find shelter for Grandpa to rest, and lucky for them, they come across a little village in the desert. Now, I believe this is where the first of the 5 challenges will take place, and a little girl who seems to be the guide on their first task takes them to the village elder, who gives them a scroll. Now, he does this by using some kind of fire summoning ability, so my first assumption was that this elder must be a Yu-Gi-Oh card as well, but after looking into it, I couldn't find a card that resembled this old man. So if anyone recognizes this guy from a Yu-Gi-Oh card, let me know in the comments down below. Now, on the scroll it says, "Silence the whisper that rise the desert winds." But I won't lie, that's a big scroll for there only to be one sentence. Now, almost 1 second after they read the scroll, they hear the whisper in the desert wind. Now, the next part is a little confusing, as the girl says this.
Yes, as we have learned from our last visitor, the answer lies in the eye of the storm.
So basically what this means is, this game auto-learns from the other people who have played it before. So the last person to play this game realized that the answer lies in the eye of the storm, which means they didn't have that knowledge when they first played it. So this was extra knowledge to help Yugi and his friends. Now, the girl also confirms only one other person had come through this game, meaning Yugi and his friends were the second people. Now, before they left, Taya received a necklace with a ruby-looking pentagon, which probably represented the 5 trials they have to go through. Now, even though they initially go looking for the village so Grandpa could rest, well, forget about that, because the writers sure did, and Grandpa just comes with them into the desert. Now, as soon as they enter the desert, they are attacked by multiple Medusa worms. Now, Yugi actually tells Grandpa to take a backseat in this fight. However, once the desert sandstorm envelops everyone and their vision, we just have to assume that Grandpa is in a place of safety. It's a shame that Grandpa couldn't take part actually, because he's definitely been really useful so far. Now, Joey summons the Flame Swordsman, Taya summons the Dark Witch, and unfortunately, as Tristan hasn't received another capsule monster, he's still relying on Thunder Kid. Now, honestly, I think this logic is flawed, because as they progress through the game, they will get stronger monsters and then just never use the monsters they received at the start. Like, I can guarantee, now that Yugi has Dark Magician, he'll never touch the capsule containing Celtic Guardian ever again. Like in Pokemon, for example, the Pokemon grow and evolve whilst you progress on your journey, whereas here, they get abandoned when you get a stronger capsule. I feel like the monsters should be utility based. For example, Hinatama Soul is good in certain environments since it's a living fire. So if each of their monsters were strong in a certain field or situation, then it would make it more interesting, as they would have to think about which capsule they should use, instead of just going for the arguably strongest monster each time until another stronger one comes along. Now, another issue I have is Yugi summoning the Dark Magician. He legit summoned it last episode, and now again, and no time has literally passed in between. Whereas the Summoned Skull received like 3 episodes worth of cooldown time. In this episode, Yugi literally summons the Dark Magician, puts it back in the capsule, and then re-summons it. So what's going on? Dark Magician is a level 7 monster with similar attack to Summoned Skull, who's a level 6, and yet Dark Magician receives no cooldown time. That's just unfair. Now, as Yugi and his friends fight the Medusa worms, they start to lose as they can't see anything due to the sandstorm. And the Medusa worms spit an acid which actually starts to turn Yugi and his friends to stone. Which I guess kinda makes sense, since it's called Medusa worm. Now the Dark Magician swoops Yugi up and takes him above the sandstorm, which reveals the Eye of the Storm. Whereas the little girl said, the answer lies in the Eye of the Storm. Now in this situation, I was wondering why the Dark Magician doesn't just fly him over to defeat the monster. But for some reason, Yugi just goes back down into the sandstorm and even calls back his Dark Magician. His plan, guys, is to run to the Eye of the Storm through the sandstorm. When Atem asks Yugi the obvious question of what would happen if they just get attacked by one of the worms, the reply Yugi gives him is, we'll just believe in the heart of the cards.
And then hope that by some strange miracle those Medusa sandworms don't turn us into statues along the way?
We just have to have faith in the heart of the cards!
Huh? What's going on? Now obviously, Yugi fails to run to the Eye of the Storm. Surprise, surprise. But when Yugi fails, a mystery man appears and tells Yugi to fuse with the armor and one of his favorite monsters. Now I wish somehow Yugi figured this out by himself instead of being told by this mystery character. I know this sounds weird, but I feel like someone telling you exactly what to do takes away from the game element of this challenge. It's like playing a game with someone behind you saying, do this, do that. It's just a backseat gamer. Now regardless, this is a really cool scene. Yugi activates his dual armor and fuses with the Dark Magician.
Join with me to become one! Activate dual armor!
He then heads into the Eye of the Storm and basically one-shots the Whisper in the Wind, which actually turns out to be the Mystical Sand, which ironically is a fusion between Ancient Elf, which makes sense, right? Ancient Elf, and the Giant Soldier of Stone. I'm sorry, what? Can someone explain to me how the Giant Soldier of Stone contributes towards this fusion in any way? And as soon as Yugi defeats her, one of the sections on Tea's pendant glows red, implying that they had completed the first trial, and they go straight into the second trial. Now, one of the reasons I felt like this episode just wasn't for me was the fact that it just felt pretty straightforward. Even though the task itself was pretty difficult in a sandstorm, they just received too much information to the point where I felt like I figured it out before they even went towards the desert. They also received extra information at the start that just seemed unfair. Now, if they just added the part about the Eye of the Sandstorm into the scroll, it would probably make more sense. Also, Dark Magician literally flew and showed Yugi the Eye of the Storm, and also spoke, by the way, which he didn't do the last episode.
Behold, the source of the storm.
Also, the mystery guy with the mask literally tells Yugi what to do to defeat the challenge, which the last person to attempt the challenge probably didn't receive. I felt like Yugi and his friends were just hard carried in this trial, and I think that's probably what irks me the most about this episode. I just felt like they didn't deserve the win here, and that the puzzle didn't really have any mystery or complexity to it. It was just pretty much go to the desert and defeat the bad guy. Or maybe I'm being too harsh. This episode, guys, is called The Trial of Light and Shadow, and this episode was absolutely brilliant and everything I wanted. This was the second trial out of the 5, as they had just beaten the first one when they defeated the Mystical Sand. Now, before we jump into the video, let's give this video a like, guys, and a cheeky subscribe if you haven't already. The second trial is on an island floating above the clouds, and the first one was in a desert, so I'm really excited to see where the other locations are going to be for the remaining challenges. Now, as they enter, this time instead of Grandpa collapsing, it was Yugi that collapses, as we discover that using the dual armor and fighting with it actually takes a massive toll on the body, to the extent that even the happy lover, which is Tea's monster, was unable to heal Yugi fully.
Plus, I have a feeling that wearing that armor takes more of a toll on his body than we realize.
Now, with Yugi fast asleep, Joey decides it was up to them to complete the next challenge. Now, honestly, this was like one of the most perfect setups for an episode. Yugi was fast asleep resting, so now we get an episode where they don't constantly rely on Yugi. A good time for the side characters to prove their worth. Now they receive another scroll, but this time it's much more cryptic and hard to understand, like a riddle should be, something we were missing from the first trial. Now the scroll said, the trial of light and shadow. Once a day, the unbreakable stone appears in the Valley of Light. To achieve the impossible, fight with the power that's greater than physical might. Now from first hearing that, honestly, I have no idea what that means, which is actually more exciting as we can slowly start to understand and figure it out as the episode goes on. Now, Taya being worried about Yugi, she actually stays behind to look after him, whilst Joey, Tristan and Grandpa go ahead to figure out the next challenge. Now, usually I would be upset by this since I want Taya to be a part of the action. However, I think this actually makes a lot of sense, leaving Yugi undefended in a strange area with potentially dangerous monsters lurking around. Probably not the best idea. Now they head to the closest valley which they could find, and Grandpa says this.
I'm getting too old for this.
But I think we're forgetting, it was kinda Grandpa who travelled halfway across the world and is actually the reason they're all trapped in this game in the first place. Now, as the island was above the clouds, the sun rays were much more intense, illuminating the valley, transforming it to the Valley of Light that is mentioned in the scroll. And as soon as that happens, they come across the unbreakable stone. Now, since the scroll called the stone unbreakable, the obvious conclusion was to try and break it. However, Tristan tries with his Thunder Kid, however it has no effect. Now, what I found strange was, Grandpa didn't try with his Summoned Skull, so now I'm wondering if Summoned Skull was actually destroyed completely when he got hit by his own lightning in a previous episode. However, as they try to figure out the solution, a new monster appears known as Prisman. However, Prisman seems relatively weak at first. However, by absorbing the sunlight, it was able to absorb enough energy to redirect it as incredibly dangerous blasts of light. Now, if you're wondering how powerful were these blasts, well, there's a scene where Joey tries to block the blast with his flame swordsman and the beam smashes right through his sword. Now they soon discover that the second part of the scroll actually meant the Prisman, fight with the power that's greater than physical might, which was the intense rays of sunlight. Now they baited the monster to attack the unbreakable stone, which was the only thing that managed to damage it. Now once the stone had been broken, they also destroyed Prisman right after. Now what I've always wondered is, what if they destroyed the Prisman before they realized that he was necessary to destroy the unbreakable stone? Would that mean they just failed the challenge and then have to try again tomorrow? Now, after they destroyed Prisman, they all thought they had won the challenge. However, a new monster appeared from the rubble of the unbreakable stone, which was Skull Guardian. Now, this is the part of the episode I wish was kind of rewritten, because Yugi wakes up and discovers that there's a second part of the scroll. Once you read the scroll in a place of darkness, it unlocks a secret message. Since this was the trial of light and shadow, the part Grandpa read was only the light section of the trial. And once Yugi reads the dark part of the scroll, he goes to help Grandpa. Now it turns out, yet again, Yugi was essential in figuring out the puzzle, which I kind of was hoping Yugi wasn't going to be needed for. You know, for at least one episode. They could have changed it so that Grandpa was the one to figure that out, and that would be his contribution towards the challenge. Now the darkness part of the scroll read, when light is extinguished, the true test begins. For a creature of darkness it brings, but only the righteous and peaceful shall pass and receive the endowment of wings. So the light is referring to the Prisman, so when it was defeated, it brought out the dark creature, which was the Skull Guardian. When Yugi arrives, they were already being attacked by the Skull Guardian, and Yugi merges with his Dark Magician once again, using his dual armor. Now whilst fighting it, a treasure chest appears, where the unbreakable stone was held. This is the exact moment Joey launches an attack with the Flame Swordsman, which is actually stopped by Yugi. You see, as soon as the treasure chest appeared, the Skull Guardian was no longer a threat, and by stopping Joey's attack, it proved to the challenge that this group was righteous and peaceful. Now I won't lie, this test was insanely difficult. Like, how are they supposed to know the Skull Guardian was going to stop attacking once the treasure chest was shown? This episode had a great start. I wish Yugi didn't have to come in and save the day like he always does, because Yugi pretty much figured everything out in a few minutes. which just shows that if Yugi wasn't tired or hurt from the last challenge, they would have passed that challenge much faster, which kind of feels like Yugi is carrying. Now inside the treasure chest were wings, like exactly angel wings. Now at first I thought the endowment of wings was a metaphor, but it was literal. Now as soon as they pass the test, the masked warrior appears once again and tells them that this test measures their character, and that if they had attacked the Skull Guardian after the treasure chest had appeared, they would have failed. Now this is a really important moment as he answers some of the questions we had. He also states that he oversees these trials, which makes sense. If he's a part of the game, he could potentially appear when they need desperate help. Now Atem asks him what would happen if they fail a task, and the answer to his question was what I assumed. They would be trapped in the game until the next warrior comes to save them. And considering where the pyramid was located and the traps they had to go through even to make it to the game, as well as the fact that Yugi and his friends were only the second people to ever enter, someone else entering the game seems very unlikely. Now we also discover what happens when you complete the entire challenge, the 5 trials. Apparently, you prove yourself to be a true king and receive a great amount of power, which is very interesting because it makes you wonder, since this is a great big shadow game, what power would it offer? Now as they completed the second trial, they used their wings given to them to fly to the next portal, which leads them to their next challenge. Now this episode was great, I just had an issue with the consistency as usual, which was in this episode, Yugi used the armor once again to fuse with the Dark Magician, but this time after he used it, he showed no signs of fatigue or muscle pain afterwards. So why did it affect him the first time? And again, he summoned the Dark Magician for like the 10th time, without any cooldown time. So I'm gonna stop worrying about consistency in this series. I feel like they only nerf the characters when it feels right for the plot, which kinda sucks. I wish they kept it consistent throughout the series, but I guess that's just Yu-Gi-Oh! This episode is called Red Eyes Black Curse, and I think we all know what that means. This episode will be about Joey and the Red Eyes Black Dragon. Now as they enter into the challenge, they walk into an active volcano, which seems like the most dangerous challenge in terms of environment so far. Now one thing they do which I really like is that they take a moment to wonder who built this game and what's the purpose behind it. It's very important to hold on to those questions, as those are the questions that we need answered by the end of the series, and it's very easy for the audience to get lost in the action and the challenges. So this was a good moment to redirect the focus to what's actually important. Now as they are in an active volcano, their first port of call is the scroll that helps them figure out what the challenge is and what they need to do to solve it. And Joey stupidly says that he will do it by himself and runs off into an active volcano. Now Joey does this right after Tristan and Grandpa nearly fall to their deaths in the lava right at the start of the episode, and the rest of the group doesn't even stop Joey. Now it turns out the scroll was literally right opposite them, so they could have just looked around before Joey ran off by himself. And the scroll read, "To gain the prize of thy desire, locate the peak that spits fire. The blade of chaos thou must release to bring about a lasting peace." Now to gain the prize, it's referring to completing the challenge, and the peak that spits fire is obviously at the top of the volcano, where they must release the blade of chaos. Now it sounds pretty straightforward, but this episode has a great way of twisting the words, and makes you believe that everything is not what it seems. Now as Grandpa, Yugi, Taya and Tristan climb to the top of the volcano, which is where they see the blade, Tristan actually falls off and heads straight into the lava, but at the last second he touches a capsule and he gets Thunder Dragon, which is awesome. Now I honestly love the fact that Taya and Tristan don't have defined decks like Joey and Yugi do, because that means they get capsules which are a bit more random and so much more fun, whereas Joey literally has Baby Dragon, Flame Swordsman, and he's probably going to get Red Eyes based on the title of the episode, which are all from his already existing deck. Now Joey, whilst alone, gets attacked. By who, you ask? Well, you guessed it, it's the Red Eyes Black Dragon. Now Joey refuses to attack back as he has a special bond with the Red Eyes. However, this seems mutual as Red Eyes also is hesitant to attack Joey. Now it's unclear how they merge or if it's a part of the curse mentioned in the title of the episode, but Joey is seen to be wearing the Red Eyes Black Dragon armor. Now I have to say, no offense to Yugi, but why does the Red Eyes Black Dragon armor just look insane? compared to Yugi's Dark Magician armor. It looks stealthy and lean, whereas Yugi's armor looks clunky and hard to move in. And aesthetically it just looks better. Now unfortunately, whatever was affecting the Red Eyes was now affecting Joey, as he was possessed by the evil. But the evil kept his voice and memories. And Taya says,
"Not again."
I think this was referencing when Joey was under Marek's control in Battle City. Now Yugi and Joey battle. Joey in the Red Eyes armor and Yugi in the Dark Magician armor. Now in theory, since the Dark Magician is a stronger monster, Yugi should have been superior. However, since Joey was his friend and he didn't want to hurt Joey, they held back. Now in theory, two people in armor of their favorite monsters, especially Yugi and Joey, the battle would be pretty epic. However, it was kinda lame. This was pretty much it. So as cool as the concept was, it wasn't really that cool seeing it in action. Now whilst Yugi and Joey are preoccupied fighting, the rest of the crew try to free the sword at the top of the volcano. However, no matter how hard they tried, the sword wouldn't budge, which means there's an extra element to this challenge they haven't discovered yet. Now once Yugi and Joey clash, Yugi is able to speak to the real Joey, which is trapped inside, and he basically tells us everything we've already figured out, but he gives Yugi permission to take down his possessed body, as that's the only way to stop Joey. And Yugi does exactly that, and it ends up separating the dragon from Joey. Now once the Red Eyes Black Dragon was free from Joey, it was still corrupted and ended up attacking Yugi. Now Yugi repelled the attack by using magical cylinders, which is a trap card. Now based on Yugi using this, I believe Yugi has access to any spell and trap cards which are linked to the Dark Magician, which just makes him super powerful. However, whilst this was happening, the sword at the top of the volcano that they needed to complete the challenge sank into the volcano, which in theory means they failed. However, there was a second sword stuck in the Red Eyes, which was causing it to act aggressively, chaotic even. Now this sword should definitely be a Yu-Gi-Oh equipped spell card because it looks awesome, but unfortunately the Blade of Chaos isn't a real card. Now once the sword has been pulled out of the Red Eyes, they successfully complete the challenge, and Joey even gets a new capsule monster, which is the Red Eyes. So it turns out the blade at the top of the volcano was actually a fake, and it was only there to throw off the challenges. Like I said, it's not what you expect. Now in this episode, Tristan receives Thunder Dragon and Joey receives Red Eyes Black Dragon, and we also get to see Joey in cool new armor. I wish Red Eyes could fuse with Joey further on in the other episodes. However, I believe that will be impossible, as it was due to the curse that they fused in the first place. Now one thing I enjoyed was the fact that after battling with Joey, Yugi did show some fatigue after using the armor, which is a good sign, because the writers remembered that using the armor takes a toll on the body. And after that guys, they head straight into the next challenge, challenge number 4. Now at the end of the episode, we see a face reveal of the masked man, which always helps them in the past challenges. Now it actually turned out to be Alex Brisbane, aka Alexander the Great, the man who actually helped them right at the very start. Now considering we already learnt that the initial Alex that helped him was actually a bad guy, this other Alex in the game seems like he's genuinely trying to help Yugi and his friends. So there seems to be two sides of Alexander the Great, one evil and one good. However, the good one seems to be trapped in the game as well. This episode is called Fruit of Evolution, and one of my personal favourite episodes. I think it's just the perfect balance of simple and fun to watch. Now before we jump into the breakdown, let's give this video a like. Alright, let's jump in. Now the next challenge is surprisingly in a pleasant location full of fruit like apples and bananas. Now whilst Joey was scoffing his face, one of the fruits turned into the scroll, detailing their next challenge. It read, choose the apple that gives you a raise and offer it up in the secret maze. Now in the forest full of apple trees, it was pretty much impossible to find the right apple mentioned in the scroll. Now as they are searching for the apple or trying to think of a way to do this, they actually reached the end of the map. So basically, the game had transported them somewhere, but had limited the size of the map in order to make it more manageable. And when they stick their heads out of the far reach of the map, all they see is shadow. Now as they continue their search for the apples and this maze, Tristan actually finds a giant melon and says this.
I was the president of the National Melon Lovers Fan Club for 4 years!
Not something you want to say out loud.
Now, is this canon? Because if it is, I need to do a video on Tristan, because there's definitely more to the character than meets the eye. Now, the melon actually turns out to be the petit moth, which is kind of weird since on the actual Yu-Gi-Oh card, it actually doesn't look like a melon. Now, this petit moth heads underground, leading Yugi and his friends to what looks like the actual test area for the challenge, as there were 3 glowing golden apples, which references the scroll. Apples that give you a raise, which means eating them gives you a boost of strength, and by the title of the episode, will probably lead to evolution. Now as they make their way underground, a maze suddenly appears out of nowhere, which again makes sense as the second part of the scroll talks about offering up the apple in the maze. So the assumption being that escaping the maze and offering up the apple means the challenge is completed. However, this maze separates everyone inside, leaving Yugi and Grandpa and everyone else to fend for themselves. Now in order to escape the maze, everyone has a different technique. Tristan draws a picture of himself on a wall so he knows if he's walked by it already, in case he goes in like a circle. Joey draws a map on a piece of paper in order to help him maneuver around the maze. Am I the only one that wonders, where do they get the pens and paper from? I feel like Yu-Gi-Oh characters have an unusual ability where they can spawn out a pen out of nowhere. Just like in episode 1 of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, where Taya brought out a pen to draw the friendship symbol. I must be like the only one who never carries a pen. Do you guys find that weird as well, or is that just me? Now Joey realizes something unusual whilst eating the fruit he had taken earlier from the forest. The fruit had a weird effect on him, even making him smarter. I feel like all the fruit in this place has a certain ability. Now as Tristan loses hope in the maze, he actually comes across a capsule monster. And it actually ended up being Shovel Crusher, which is an absolute tank of a monster. Now I feel like last episode, Tristan received Thunder Dragon, which is a badass Yu-Gi-Oh monster. And to give him Shovel Crusher so soon, I feel like they're trying to make up for only giving Tristan Thunder Kid for the first 6 episodes. Now Taya actually has one of the worst experiences in the maze, and is attacked by Jerai Gumo, which is actually one of the scariest spider looking Yu-Gi-Oh cards. And before Taya could defeat it with her Dark Witch, the Jerai Gumo actually snatches the capsule from her hands, leaving her only with the happy lover. Now luckily for Taya, she also gets a new capsule monster, which is called Seiyaryu. Honestly, I think I butchered that name. Let me know in the comments if I did. Now, this is a badass dragon monster, but I do feel like they're just throwing capsule monsters at people in the last few episodes. But I'm not complaining because Taya and Tristan deserve it. And with a new monster, she obliterates the Jerai Gumo. Now, Joey also comes across a monster in the maze, which is a Battleox, which almost immediately gets run over by Tristan's Shovel Crusher. Now, being alone and hunted in a maze by monsters must have been terrifying, but due to Tristan's Shovel Crusher literally crushing the walls of the maze, they eventually managed to reunite, purely from the damage and noise this creature made. Honestly, Tristan was the MVP this episode. He literally saved them. Now, they eventually managed to head back to the location where the golden apples were originally. However, there was something strange, because one minute they were on the back of the Shovel Crusher, and the next moment we see Joey, Taya and Yugi on the ground, whilst Tristan and Grandpa were missing. It turns out Tristan is unable to control his creature, and it wouldn't stop, and it kept crashing into walls. Now what I find weird is, if Joey, Yugi and Taya managed to get off the back of that monster, how did Tristan and Grandpa manage to stay on? I sense another poor way to get rid of 2 characters out of the next action scene. Now when they look up at the apples, they actually notice that one of the apples had disappeared and was eaten by the petit moth. And what was left of the petit moth was a cocoon of evolution. And once the cocoon hatched, it gave birth to the great moth. Now in order to get to the apples, they had to destroy the monster. and due to Taya, Joey and Yugi all attacking the Great Moth at the same time, they managed to overpower it, but then it evolved again into the ultimate Great Moth, which means one apple was able to evolve the Petit Moth multiple times. Now eventually Yugi discovers this and eats the second apple, leading to his own Dark Magician evolving into the Magician of Black Chaos. And after fusing with his new and improved monster, Yugi was just too much to handle for the ultimate Great Moth. Now I've always wondered what would happen if a monster that didn't have a natural evolution ate one of the apples. Like for example, if Joey's Red Eyes ate an apple, it would probably transform into the Red Eyes Darkness Dragon. But what if a monster like the Flame Swordsman, or like Kuribo, something that doesn't have a natural evolution, would we see the birth of a new Yu-Gi-Oh card? Now since there were 3 apples, one was eaten by the moth, and the other was eaten by Yugi in order to match the power of the ultimate Great Moth. The last apple was actually the apple they had to offer up in order to pass the challenge. So if they had eaten all 3, they would have failed. Now in this episode, 2 of the side characters, Tristan and Taya, received some big monsters, and Yugi got the biggest power up, which was the evolution into the Magician of Black Chaos. Now I have to say, they did Yugi dirty with those shoes. It just looks so silly. But I do feel like since they have just completed the 4th challenge, they're now giving everyone a major power boost, as they are now on their 5th challenge, which will probably be the most difficult. Now the last portal actually brings Yugi and his friends back to the same forest they were in when they first arrived in this world, leading to a full circle moment. Now this is also the moment Alexander the Great arrives and reveals his identity to Yugi and explains how this place came to be. This is the moment we've been waiting for, as it provides answers to many of the questions we've had in the first place. Now Alexander is shown to be wearing the same armor that Yugi received, meaning Alexander the Great had also been a part of the Capsule Monsters game. And if you guys remember, we learned in the first trial that there had been only one other person to have played this game. So Alexander the Great was the first one. Now if you remember what we got told by Alex at the end of the second trial, if you fail the game, you get stuck in this world until the next people come along, which sounds suspiciously like what happened with Alexander the Great. Now we finally get the backstory of Alexander the Great on how he almost took over the world with the help of his good luck charm, which was the Millennium Ring. Now honestly, when they mentioned this fact, this was actually amazing. Not only does this tie in with the original story, it also opens up so many interesting questions, like what has the Millennium Ring been up to for 3,000 years whilst the Pharaoh has been sealed away? Now eventually the Millennium Ring started to cloud Alexander the Great's mind and he lost the respect of his men. However, this is where he ran into the guardian of the Millennium items, which was Shadi. Shadi wanted to test Alexander to see if he was worthy of the Millennium Ring's power and worthy of being a true king. Now it's unclear based on the conversation, however it's pretty much implied that it was Shadi who built the pyramid and created the shadow game, which is the Capsule Monsters. Now if this is the case, is the board game also Shadi's doing? And what would be Shadi's purpose for doing this? Now my first thought on this is Shadi powerful enough to create a shadow game of this magnitude? However, I think as a guardian of the Millennium items and the wielder of the Millennium Key and Scale, I think it's definitely possible. Now we learn that after Alexander failed Shadi's test, he also lost everything and his kingdoms. In an image of Alexander after his defeat, we see him without the Millennium Ring, so potentially Shadi took it from him after he was defeated, which explains why Shadi had the Millennium Ring when it was found by Bakura and his father. Now I think Alexander the Great is a fascinating Yu-Gi-Oh character, and I probably will be doing a video on just him and his story, whilst also reflecting on the Alexander the Great we learnt about in history. So if you want to see a separate video on just him, let me know in the comments down below. Now Alexander reveals a scroll for their last challenge, and it reads, "Slay them all if you dare, earth, fire, sky, water and air." Now the last challenge seems very straightforward, however since it's the final trial, and from what we've seen so far, you already know it's going to be tough and not what we expect. Now something I do find odd, before they head to the next challenge, Alexander gives Solomon a capsule monster. Now as he does it, he says this.
Which monster's inside?
One that you'll need if you expect to pass this test.
but when Grandpa uses it, inside is the Curse of Dragon. Now the way Alexander talks about it makes it sound like it's gonna be something like Exodia. Now the funny part is, why did he give it to Grandpa? If this monster was really important, surely he would give it to Yugi. Well, I like to think he's been watching the party throughout the trials and realizes that Grandpa has been useless so far. So he had to take it upon himself to actually give him a capsule monster. Like, I'm not trying to be a hater, but even Grandpa's ability to translate Egyptian hieroglyphics isn't needed since they have a Tem who can also read it. Now they head to a small village for the last test, known as the village of the Divine Dragon. Now they come across a ritual where a little girl was going to be sacrificed. Her soul was needed for the Divine One, which is clearly the Blue Eyes White Dragon, in order to protect the village. Have we seen this storyline before? I think we have. In the Legendary Heroes arc, where Yugi and his friends enter a virtual game created by Seto Kaiba, the main storyline is regarding a princess called Adina, who looks exactly like Mokuba, and the bad guy is called the Witty Phantom, who wants to sacrifice the princess in order to summon the mythical dragon. However, Princess Adina talks about a prophecy about a legendary warrior who will come and slay the dragon. Now this story so far seems like they have already taken an existing storyline and just repurposed it, but instead of the mythical dragon being the 5-headed dragon, like it was in the Legendary Heroes arc, this time it's the Blue Eyes White Dragon. And spoiler alert, the main bad guy in this episode is the 5-headed dragon, as well as the fact that the Legendary Heroes will come to slay it. I think this is what we call lazy writing. Now let's just pretend like this is an original story plot and analyze the rest of the episode. Now Yugi and his friends arrive and stop them from sacrificing the girl and learn about the tragic tale of the village. So apparently this village was attacked by 5 different dragons, and the Blue Eyes White Dragon protected the village and banished those dragons to different areas, and by doing so protected the village until the heroes arrive to slay the dragons. However, since the Blue Eyes has limited energy, it requires sacrifices in order to have the strength to protect them. Now I feel like they tried to paint the Blue Eyes as the savior, but he also ends the story with this line.
That's why we hold this annual ritual. For the White Dragon feeds on human souls.
Now to me, it sounds like the Blue Eyes is just as bad as the other dragons. Also, everyone else in this village was okay with the little girl being the sacrifice, just because she volunteered. I genuinely at this point can't decide who the villains are in this episode. Is it the Blue Eyes White Dragon? Is it the villagers? Or is it the 5 dragons? Maybe when the scroll said, slay them all if you dare, it actually meant all of them, like literally the villagers and the Blue Eyes as well. And as they headed back into town, they came across a statue of a dragon with a sword underneath, stuck in the stone, and only the legendary warrior can unlock the sword. I feel like I've heard this story before about a sword being stuck in the stone. No, impossible. This sounds like another classic original story created by the writers of Yugioh. Now this magic sword actually comes with its own prophecy. When a great power descends from the sky, the sacred sword will rise. Now the party splits into 5, each one heading to a different dragon. The first one was called the Whirlwind Forest, where Joey goes and faces the Lustre Dragon number 2. The second is called the Bottomless Spring, where Grandpa goes and faces the Aqua Dragon. The third one is called the Cave of No Return, where Taya goes and faces the Serpent Knight Dragon. The fourth one is Meteor Mountain, where Tristan goes and faces the Meteor Dragon. The fifth one is called the Great Molten Chasm, where Yugi goes and faces the Tyrant Dragon. Now 10 points to whoever came up with those names. I gotta say, definitely creative. Now this also relates back to the scroll, as each of these dragons are a different attribute, which the scroll mentions: earth, fire, sky, water and air. Now if you're wondering why there's sky as well as air, well, apparently air is Lustre Dragon number 2 and sky is the Meteor Dragon. Now Yugi goes to the most dangerous place and unlocks the Black Lustre Soldier, and as you can see from the thumbnail art which I've been using, I think we know what's gonna happen. Now they all manage to defeat the dragons in their first attempt, which I find incredibly strange. The only people that have monsters stronger than the dragons they're facing are Yugi's Black Lustre Soldier, who's got 3000 attack compared to Tyrant Dragon's 2900 attack, as well as Taya's Seiyaryu, who's got 2500 attack compared to Serpent Night Dragon's 2350 attack. Now Joey's Red Eyes has the same attack as Luster Dragon number 2, but Tristan's Thunder Dragon and Grandpa's Cursed Dragon are much weaker than the dragons they're facing. Also, let's not forget, in episode 1, they established a field power bonus, and each of these dragons are in the middle of their own environments. They should be way stronger. Like for example, how is Tristan's Thunder Dragon beating Meteor Dragon on Meteor Mountain? Huh? But anyway, they soon realize that these dragons are actually invincible, and even after they are defeated, it isn't enough, as they just come back. Now Yugi's plan is to bring them all back to the village, since the prophecy of the sword mentions that when a great power descends, meaning the 5 dragons, the sword will rise, and that's exactly what it does. Yugi uses the sword to absorb the power of the dragons and then slays them. However, that wasn't the end of the test, even though in every respect it probably should have been. But the 5 dragons fuse together and become the 5-headed dragon. Now this is technically where episode 9 ends, however we are going to go straight into episode 10. Also, why did Alexander give Grandpa the Curse of Dragon? Is it because it's a dragon and it helps boost the sword's power, as the sword absorbs the power of all dragons? Because technically, Thunder Dragon isn't even a real dragon, it's a thunder monster. Sorry guys, someone had to say that. Now Grandpa finally has something relevant to say. He mentions that in the Capsule Monsters board game, there's a 5-headed dragon that can only be defeated by light monsters. So it turns out that sword was another item in the game to actually throw off the heroes, because it didn't solve their problem. Now this is the part of the episode I actually dislike the most. The NPC character, which is the girl who was going to be sacrificed at the start of the episode, prays to the white dragon to come and help Yugi and his friends. However, at the start of the episode, we already established that the white dragon needs souls to power it up in order to help. However, just by praying with the entire village, she was able to summon the Blue Eyes White Dragon, which means 2 things. The villain, which is the Blue Eyes White Dragon, always had enough energy, but probably just enjoyed the human sacrifices. It also means that Yugi and his friends were saved by a bunch of NPCs. Now, if the girl had seen how much Yugi was struggling in order to protect her and the village, and then ran to the altar and then sacrificed herself to the Blue Eyes White Dragon, that would be way more impactful as a scene. Now don't get me wrong, that's a pretty dark storyline for a kids show, but it would be following the rules that were already set by the episode. Now as the Blue Eyes White Dragon was summoned, Yugi used his dual armor to fuse with the Blue Eyes. Now I won't lie, this is one of the coolest scenes in the entire show. Not only did Atem look amazing with the Blue Eyes armor, Atem also single-handedly closed the dragon's mouth and with sheer strength picked up the entire dragon and threw it to the ground, and then right after used white lightning attack with his blade. Honestly, this scene sent goosebumps down my spine. What an awesome scene. I had to watch it multiple times. The music, the action, the armor, Atem's final words before dealing his last final attack. Amazing. Now this wasn't all. They added a side-by-side comparison of Atem whilst he was ruling Egypt. Genuinely, this scene made me forget about all the minor issues that led up until this moment. Now with that, they had completed the last challenge, and usually this is where the episode ends. However, there's a lot more to dive into guys, so stay with me. Now that the pendant around Tea's neck had all 5 pieces completed, Alexander instructed them that it was a key to unlocking great power, a power that allows them to rule the world. Now we actually received some very important information. It turns out the Millennium Ring had split Alexander into 2 souls, the good version which was trapped in the Capsule Monsters game, and the evil version which was trapped in the pyramid. Now Dr. Alex Brisbane was actually a direct descendant of Alexander the Great, and a colleague of Grandpa Moto for many years. However, once they entered the pyramid together to investigate, the dark side of Alexander the Great took over Alex Brisbane's body, leading to all these unfortunate events. Now in theory, this answers all our questions. We now know who created the pyramid and the game, which was Shardy, and we know the backstory of the master man, Alexander the Great. But if you guys remember in episode 1, where Joey wins a convenient raffle to India, and the plane crashes at the exact location as the pyramid, who organized all of that? Well, Alexander the Great explains that the evil side of him, who took control of Dr. Brisbane, had brought Yugi and his friends to this part of the world. But that seems very tough. to believe. That means the raffle ticket was organized by the evil Dr. Brisbane. And was Joey the target for that raffle? How would he even know that Joey was going to enter the raffle? How did he organize all of this whilst being trapped in a small area in India? How was he even sure that Yugi and his friends would pass all the challenges of the capsule monsters? And what if Yugi decided that he didn't want to go to India? To me personally, it doesn't seem very well thought out and very unlikely. Let me know what you guys think on that. I'm very curious, so let me know in the comments. Now, in order to escape the game, Alexander told them they had to concentrate. Their plan was simple. They head back and meet Alex Brisbane, who was being controlled by the evil side of Alexander the Great. Now, the good Alexander the Great would hide in Grandpa's body and fight his evil side and take control. Now, this plan almost worked, but the good side of Alexander the Great failed to take control, and Grandpa, believing that the plan had worked, handed over the key to Dr. Alex Brisbane, who was still evil at the time. I won't lie, Grandpa sure is trusting. He just takes the guy's word for it and hands over a potential world-ending key to the man who wants to end the world. I won't lie, there's only 2 episodes left of this series. If Grandpa doesn't do something miraculous to redeem himself, I swear to God, because everything he's done up until this moment has been terrible. Now, with the evil spirit in possession of the key, he unlocks a door where great power is held. However, at that exact moment, he is jumped by Yugi and his friends, and they all fall into what looks like space together. And this is where they meet Shadi. Now, it's actually revealed that Alexander the Great actually passed all 5 trials. So Alexander the Great and his 4 other soldiers completed the pendant just like Yugi did. The only issue was the pendant wouldn't open the door to the room that gives you the power he was craving, which absolutely makes 0 sense. Honestly, I hate it. Each trial Yugi and his friends completed tested a different area to judge your heart and see if they did the right thing. Now, after all of that, and you pass each trial, and the door decides that you're still not worthy, then what's the point of having the trials in the first place? Everyone should just receive a pendant and let the door decide who's actually worthy. I actually feel bad for Alexander, if I'm honest, because it was just a waste of time. Now, as the doors wouldn't open up for Alexander the Great, which meant they failed the test, and his followers had their souls taken and trapped in the pyramids, while Alexander's soul, which had been torn in two by the ring, his good side was locked in the capsule monsters game, and the evil side was locked in the pyramid, until his descendant, Dr. Alex Brisbane, walked into the pyramid and his body was taken over. Now, what I find strange is, they actually explain what occurred afterwards. Do you remember how in the last episode, I thought that the evil Dr. Brisbane, controlled by the spirit, organized Joey winning the raffle and the plane crashing in this part of the world? Well, actually, it turns out none of that was him. The true answer was, guys, it was fate all along.
So all that stuff happened by coincidence?
No, these events were guided by the hands of fate.
You gotta be out of your turban, bro!
That's right, fate was the reason that Joey won the raffle. Fate was also the reason they were all free to come to India in those days, and fate was also the reason that the plane crashed in that part of India. So there we have it, guys. If you ever have any mysteries that need to be solved in Yugioh, well, the answer is fate. Problem solved. So Dr. Alex Brisbane's solution was getting Yugi and his friends to complete the challenges for him, and then steal their pendant to open the door. However, Shadi, who ruled over the test, decided that there should be one final game between Yugi and his friends and Alexander the Great. I'm not too sure why, since Alexander had clearly failed the test by the door centuries ago. So the final game was an all-out Capsule Monsters war between Alexander the Great and the souls of the warriors who had followed him, and Yugi and his friends. So it's a pretty simple concept. Now Yugi brings out the classic speech about how he needs to do this alone.
Wait! I need to do this alone, guys! I'm not going to put you in any more danger than I already have!
By the way, guys, in 12 episodes, this is the 3rd time he's used this speech. At this point, I would just be like, fine, do it alone. But this also makes no sense, because early on in the series, it's actually Yugi that convinces Atem that they needed friendship to succeed, and that they need to do it together.
Don't even think of trying this alone!
But Yugi,
We need to work as a team!
it's too...
Trust me! We all have to work together!
You're right. It's the only way.
It's like they forgot each time a new enemy comes along. Now, they all release every single capsule monster for the all-out war. Now, it's really interesting to see what the opposing team has as monsters. So let's start with Alexander's soldiers number 1, as none of these guys were actually given any names in the anime, for some weird reason. So soldier number 1 had Garma Sword, Makura the Destructor, Dark Geroid, and Lekunga. I'm sensing a bit of Marek's energy in these cards. Now, soldier number 2 had Total Defense Shogun, Manticore of Darkness, and the Big Tusked Mammoth. Soldier number 3 had Reflect Bounder and Succubus Knight. Soldier number 4 had the Fire-Winged Pegasus and Stealth Bird. And last, Alexander the Great had Reshef the Dark Being, which is the only monster he summoned at the time, which is insane because Reshef is so huge. Now, as Yugi fuses with his strongest monster, which is the Blackluster Soldier, Alexander the Great merges with Reshef. Now, the action scenes between Yugi and his friends versus the nameless soldiers who worked for Alexander the Great was actually quite entertaining. It wasn't what you'd expect. I thought it'd be mindless clashes with no real strategy. However, I was wrong. We had multiple scenes where Taya and Tristan and even Grandpa were outsmarting the opposing team in sneaky maneuvers, not relying on just strength but also intellect. However, it becomes abundantly clear that Alexander's side is losing. But as classic evil guys tend to be, Alexander doesn't care about them at all. And he actually ends up sacrificing all of his soldiers in order to use a different capsule monster he hadn't shown before, which actually turned out to be the 7-armed fiend. Do you guys remember this monster? This monster was actually foreshadowed in episode 1. It was the creature from Yugi's nightmares, and every time we saw it, we saw Atem losing to this creature. Now, I have to say, this monster does open up a few questions, if I'm being honest. Where did Alexander the Great get a creature like this? Now, we see it as a normal capsule, so this must have been unlocked ordinarily, like a normal capsule. But this also had a special summoning condition, which required 4 sacrifices, human ones, which is a completely new concept, up until now. I've always thought that stronger monsters just meant they have a longer cooldown time. Now, what I find odd is, the 7-armed fiend is so OP, even Grandpa says.
Well, in the board game, it's practically indestructible.
Are you telling me Alexander the Great just got incredibly lucky with his capsules? Like, whilst everyone else is receiving Thunder Kid or Happy Lover, Alexander the Great received Reshef and the 7-armed fiend, which seems a little suspicious. Also, how did this capsule monster enter Yugi's dream and also affect the Millennium Puzzle in the way it did? I know it's powerful, but surely it's still a normal monster, right? Well, since we have another question that we don't receive an answer to, we'll just pop it down to fate. Now, it's revealed that each of the 7-armed fiend's arms has a special ability, so that's a total of 7 abilities, which is just insane. Also, I can't seem to find a Yu-Gi-Oh card for the 7-armed fiend, so I assume it's just created for this series alone. Now, the first arm is called the Arm of the Skulls, which is basically an ability which spawns Skull Knight number 2. So basically, the 7-armed fiend, which is a capsule monster, has an ability to spawn other capsule monsters, and a lot of them as well. Now, the second arm is called Arm of Regeneration, so it can just heal the Skull Knights when they are hurt. Now, we have 5 other arms to go. Now, the third arm is called Arm of Entrapment, which basically summons a portal, and the 7-armed fiend can summon multiple arms to stop you in your tracks. The fourth arm is called Arm of Defense, which can literally block any attack. The fifth arm, revealed to us, is called Arm of Destruction, and you can basically guess what that arm does. It destroys things. The sixth arm is called Arm of Clairvoyance, which actually allows the fiend to read Yugi's mind, which is just wild. It's very similar to the ability Pegasus has with his Millennium Eye in Duelist Kingdom. Now, we never actually find out the ability of the 7th arm, but even so, this has to be one of the most broken monsters ever to exist. Like, even the ability to read your mind is pretty much impossible to defeat. Now, the creature uses the Arm of Destruction to target Grandpa Moto, and honestly, I was rooting for the fiend on that attack. However, unfortunately, all the weaker monsters owned by Taya, Tristan and Joey protected Grandpa. Now, I thought the way they could defeat this creature would be how they defeated Pegasus in Duelist Kingdom, since they already had experience against someone who could read their minds, which was called the Mind mind shuffle, which is where Yugi and Atem would switch their bodies, keeping their thoughts away from each other. So when their mind is red, it doesn't contain the strategy the other one came up with. However, since this is a physical combat zone, it kinda doesn't work, as Atem is the athletic one and constantly switching bodies in battle seems illogical. Now instead what they do is, Atem links his thoughts with the Millennium Puzzle, so when Alexander the Great tries to read his mind using the 7-armed fiend, he traps Alexander's mind in the Millennium Puzzle. And as we know, Atem doesn't have his memories, so the Millennium Puzzle is just a maze. And whilst Alexander the Great is trapped inside, Atem is able to defeat the 7-armed fiend, which is actually a genius strategy. Now what I don't understand is, why didn't they try this strat on Pegasus? It seems way more effective. Now with the fiend defeated, I was under the impression that the main bad guy was gone, since the fiend was the one who was foreshadowed and Yugi had multiple nightmares about that one creature. However, that wasn't the case, as Reshef was left. So why didn't they foreshadow Reshef instead? I feel like all the build up and hype of this one fiend, but now that it's defeated, it feels like the end, and introducing Reshef as the main bad guy seems a little strange. However, when the fiend was defeated, the 4 soldiers who were sacrificed all came back with their capsule monsters, so it's only a temporary sacrifice. Now this is actually the part where the episode ends and the second one begins. Now you have to admit, even those soldiers who weren't named, you gotta admire their loyalty. They were just sacrificed to summon the 7-armed fiend, and as soon as they came back from not being sacrificed, they immediately followed Alexander the Great's orders and began their assault on Yugi and his friends. Now since the 7-armed fiend had done a lot of damage and taken a lot of energy from Yugi and his friends, this time around, when they went head to head with Alexander the Great's soldiers, they began to lose. Now Yugi attempted to get close to Reshef of Destruction, as from first glance it looks like it's undefended. However, it actually had a built-in laser system called the Omnidirectional Laser Assault. Now these lasers had no direction, so it threatened everyone, including Alexander's own people, yet again showing no regard for them. Now Atem finds a blind spot in the armor, which was attacking from underneath. Now I have to say, there's a scene where Yugi is getting carried by the Magician of Black Chaos in order to get close enough to Reshef to attack. However, following him behind is a Celtic Guardian, but the Celtic Guardian can't fly, so it just looks like Celtic Guardian is just jumping from laser to laser, which is just impossible. Now when Yugi successfully makes his attack against Alexander the Great, Alexander yet again changes strategies, and he actually absorbs all the monsters his soldiers own in order to form 3 energy orbs, boosting the strength of Reshef, however leaving his own soldiers defenseless. I think they're really trying to push the parallels between Atem and Alexander, where one cares about his men and the other has no regard for them. Now those 3 energy balls are actually already on display on the Yugioh card, so that's a pretty nice touch to show how those orbs actually got to be a part of Reshef in the first place. Now when Alexander attacks with Reshef, any damage taken from the monster is actually relayed back to his men, meaning Alexander no longer takes any damage from Yugi's attacks, using his own soldiers as a human shield. Now Alexander, using his new and powerful Reshef, takes down all of Yugi's friends. So Atem uses every single one of his capsule monsters, including the Black Luster soldier he fused with, in order to protect them, which again is a massive parallel to Alexander. Alexander took all the power for himself, whilst Yugi shared his power with his friends, which is probably why the door rejected Alexander in the first place. Now as Yugi was now defenseless and focused on the safety of his friends, Alexander attacks him with a massive energy beam, and this unlocks the true power of the armor, as every single one of his friends' monsters fuse with Yugi. So that's Thunder Dragon, Red Eyes Black Dragon, Seirairu, and the Curse of Dragon. Now I think this armor would have been awesome, but they ruined the look by adding a red aura which just hides most of the armor. The armor's name was the Armor of Unity, which can only be unlocked by having a strong bond with your friends. Now we knew this friendship thing was coming, however they did it in an epic way, but I really wish they got rid of the red aura. It really takes away from the final scene where he defeats Reshef. It should have been similar to how it was when he fused with the Blue Eyes armor. That was clean and you could see every detail on the armor clearly. Now with the final attack, Yugi defeated Alexander the Great, and the pharaoh had proven that he was the true king. Now with the game over, Shadi offers Atem a mysterious orb which is meant to be the power to be able to rule the entire world. Now I wonder what this power actually consisted of. However, we'll never know as Yugi refuses. This also allowed the souls of Alexander and his men to be finally released and in peace. And we even get a shot of Atem and Alexander the Great as pharaohs, as Alexander the Great also ruled Egypt at one point in history, which again was just an epic scene. Now after the test was over, the pyramid disappeared as Shadi's shadow game was finally over, but we do get the answer to one of the questions we had. That time did stop as they entered the game. So those 3 to 4 days, they were probably gone in the game. No time actually passed in the real world. Now Yugi, Joey, Taya, Tristan, Grandpa Moto and Dr. Alex Brisbane all fly off into the sunset. The moral of the story being to treat others with respect, since that's what ultimately got Yugi the win against Alexander. And that is the end of this episode and this series. Now I have to say guys, this series, the Capsule Monster arc, was quite gimmicky at parts. However, personally, I really enjoyed this series, and I hope I managed to convince a few of you guys to give this arc a try and even enjoy it. Well guys, let me know if you enjoyed this series in the comments down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time guys.